Islamic Affairs Council in Nigeria recently made a powerful statement rejecting claims of a Christian genocide in the country. The claims were circulating widely, fueled by rising tensions and violent attacks in various regions, particularly affecting Christians in the north and central parts of the country. However, the Islamic Affairs Council firmly denied these claims, arguing that the violence in Nigeria is more complex and cannot be reduced to religious genocide. They emphasized that the violence is not a coordinated attack on any single religious group, but rather stems from a mix of factors, including criminal activity, ethnic tensions, and political instability. Now let's take a step back and look at what's really happening. Nigeria is a massive country, home to over 200 million people, with a fairly equal division between Muslims and Christians. The violence that's been happening over the years is tragic, but it's important to understand that this violence is not exclusively based on religion. Whether it's Boko Haram in the northeast, ISWAP in the northwest, or herders and farmers clashing over land, the violence spans across religious lines. It's an issue that affects all Nigerians, regardless of faith. But the narrative of a Christian genocide has gained traction in some circles, particularly with Western governments and media outlets picking up on it. The narrative is often fueled by reports of mass killings in predominantly Christian communities, leading some to believe that there is a deliberate attempt to wipe out Christians in Nigeria. This claim, while emotionally charged, lacks solid evidence to back it up. The Nigerian government, along with religious groups like the NSCIA, has consistently rejected the idea of a state-sponsored attack on Christians. They argue that the violence is not a result of religious differences, but is instead driven by criminal groups, political instability, and a breakdown of law and order in various parts of the country. While religious communities do suffer disproportionately in certain regions, the violence is not aimed at wiping out one particular faith group. The attacks are random and indiscriminate, and it's the everyday people, both Christians and Muslims, who bear the brunt of this violence. Now, you may be wondering why this issue has been brought to the forefront again. Well, it's clear that there are some serious political motivations behind it. When Western nations or human rights organizations highlight the suffering of Christian communities, they often frame it as a religious genocide. This adds pressure on the Nigerian government and pushes for international intervention. But the Nigerian government is not keen on being labeled as a violator of religious freedom, especially on the world stage. So they've pushed back against these claims, insisting that they do not reflect the reality on the ground. It's also important to understand that the idea of a Christian genocide is not just a political issue, but a deeply divisive one. Such claims can stoke religious tensions within Nigeria, further alienating communities that are already struggling to coexist. The narrative that one religion is being singled out for destruction can lead to more violence, and as it portrays Muslims as the enemy and Christians as the victims. This kind of framing only serves to fuel hatred and division, rather than promoting peace and understanding. One thing that's often overlooked is the role of criminal groups in these attacks. The truth is, much of the violence in Nigeria is driven by criminal interests. There are bands of thieves and bandits who are motivated by financial gain, not religious ideology. Kidnapping for ransom has become a lucrative business for these criminals, and they often target Christian communities because they believe these communities are more likely to pay large ransoms. So, while many of the victims of these attacks are Christians, they are not being targeted because of their faith, but rather because they are seen as more vulnerable. We also need to talk about the role of the media in this whole saga. Media coverage, particularly in the West, has tended to sensationalize the violence. News outlets have a tendency to frame the story as a religious conflict because it makes for a more dramatic narrative. But the reality is much more complicated. Violence is a symptom of a much larger problem. Nigeria's political instability, its struggling economy, and its failure to deal with corruption and poor governance. These are the root causes of the violence. Religion may play a part in some of the conflicts, but it's not the main driver of the violence. Now, let's also consider the impact of this story on Nigeria's image internationally. The idea of a Christian genocide can tarnish Nigeria's reputation and draw unwanted attention. The country has enough problems as it is: terrorism, insurgencies, and a weak economy. Adding the label of religious genocide to the mix only makes things worse. It isolates Nigeria further from the international community and makes it harder for the country to get the help it needs. So, what's the way forward? The solution lies in tackling the root causes of the violence. Nigeria needs to focus on strengthening its governance, improving security, and addressing the economic challenges that fuel unrest. The country's leaders need to be more proactive in protecting all of their citizens, regardless of religion, and they need to take decisive action against the criminal groups that are wreaking havoc. It's also crucial for religious leaders from both the Christian and Muslim communities to come together and lead the charge in promoting peace and unity. The message should be clear. Nigerians need to stand together, not as Christians or Muslims, but as one people fighting for a better future. As we delve deeper into the situation in Nigeria, it's important to highlight the role of international attention and how it impacts the country. When the United States or international bodies raise concerns about religious persecution, the spotlight is often placed on specific groups, whether Christians, Muslims, or others. While it's crucial to bring attention to human rights violations, there's a fine line between bringing awareness and creating further division. When terms like genocide are used without clear, verifiable evidence, it can escalate the situation, leading to more mistrust and tension between communities. Now let's think about what's happening within Nigeria itself. The government's response has been one of deflection. It's understandable to some extent given that the accusations carry heavy weight internationally. Being labeled as a violator of religious freedoms or committing genocide can have massive consequences, not just for the country's reputation, but also for its ability to secure international aid, investments, and support for internal reforms. And let's not forget, this is a country dealing with a long-standing battle against Boko Haram, an insurgent group that declared allegiance to ISIS, and now the rise of ISWAP in the northeast. They've caused devastation, leading to thousands of deaths and displacements. But is this the same as a religious-based, state-sponsored campaign? That's the critical point we need to clarify. The answer is not as simple as it may seem. The violent groups terrorizing Nigeria are highly fragmented, operating without any unifying ideology other than their criminal motivations, like gaining territory, resources, or even controlling illicit trade routes. The Boko Haram insurgency, for example, started with the ideological push of a group seeking to establish strict Sharia law. But over time, it has become far more about criminal activity. ISWAP similarly operates as a militant jihadist group, but doesn't always target specific religious communities. Instead, they target vulnerable communities as a means of advancing their agenda. So, while religion may factor into their rhetoric, it's not the driving force behind their attacks. The motives are far more complex. Now, for those of us watching this from the outside or as part of a global audience, the question becomes, how do we view the situation from afar? Do we take everything at face value, relying on headlines and sensational stories that don't always tell the full picture? Or do we dig deeper and understand that the issue in Nigeria is far more nuanced than religion versus religion? In many ways, what's happening in Nigeria is a perfect example of how misinformation, sensationalism, and oversimplification can cloud our understanding of complex issues. And while human suffering should always be highlighted, we need to avoid creating narratives that contribute to further division or misunderstanding. Let's now shift the conversation a little bit to the role of religion in the ongoing violence. Both Christian and Muslim communities in Nigeria have suffered greatly, with many innocent lives lost, homes destroyed, and families displaced. But in the midst of this, it's important to remember the shared struggles of these communities. Christians, for instance, have been victims of attacks, but so have Muslims. It's not uncommon to hear stories of Muslim farmers being killed by bandits in the same regions where Christian communities are being targeted. The real enemy here isn't one religious group. It's the violence that permeates all corners of Nigeria. A violence that doesn't discriminate based on faith, but rather exploits the existing social and political vulnerabilities in the country. It's also worth mentioning that amidst all the violence and chaos, there are many positive examples of interfaith dialogue and cooperation. Local religious leaders, both Christian and Muslim, have worked together to promote peace and reconciliation in conflict zones. They've facilitated meetings, conducted joint prayers, and advocated for peace through their sermons and community outreach. These efforts often go unnoticed because the media tends to focus on the most dramatic and divisive stories. But the truth is, there are people on the ground working tirelessly to bridge divides and bring people together. The bottom line here is that Nigeria is a country in crisis, but it's also a country with a deep well of resilience. The claims of a Christian genocide are dangerous because they obscure the real issues that need to be addressed: government corruption, lack of security, economic hardship, and the growing influence of criminal groups. Religion has been used as a tool by some of these groups, but it is not the root cause of the violence. If Nigeria is to find peace, the focus must shift from a narrative of religious warfare to a more comprehensive understanding of the structural problems facing the country. To wrap up, the Nigerian government's response to the Christian genocide allegations is an important one. By denying the claim, they are attempting to focus the conversation on the broader issues of security, governance, and the rule of law. However, it's crucial that they don't simply deflect blame, but actively engage with the root causes of the violence. They must strengthen security forces, support communities most affected by the violence, and work towards meaningful reforms that address the underlying issues driving the conflict. For the international community, the lesson here is clear. Be cautious in how we frame the situation. Genocide is a powerful term, and its use should be reserved for cases where there is clear, systemic evidence of a deliberate effort to destroy a group based on their identity. While violence is rampant in Nigeria, it's not accurate or helpful to frame it as a religious genocide. Nigeria needs support, but it also needs understanding and a clear-eyed approach to addressing the complex challenges it faces. Thank you for staying with me through this. If you found this analysis helpful, please remember to like this video and subscribe to stay informed. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think about the situation in Nigeria? Let's keep the conversation going. If you want me to continue, feel free to let me know. Stay safe and stay curious.